I'm Julie Alexandria.
And I'm Jennifer Mercedes.
Between the two of us, we have over 2 decades of experience working in professional sports.
We're telling the stories of women who are at the top of their game in sports and business.
Welcome
to the Locker Room.
Hey everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of Locker Room Talk. I'm Julie Alexandria alongside Jennifer Mercedes, and our guest today, she is Sarina Morales, and she does it all from social media to hosting to reporting for the NFL, ESPN. She has a background in social media marketing and is an expert when it comes to consumer growth strategies. This is a girl that you're going to want on your team. Trust me. Welcome to the Locker Room, Sarina. It is so good to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm like, finally, let's get some Latinas in this room together.
Love it. Let's start off this interview with a quick fire round. We're just going to throw out some questions and you answer with the first thing that comes to mind. Okay. First of all, as a transplant, as a New Yorker living on the West Coast, what do you miss more, New York pizzas or New York bagels?
Okay, this is like, people are going to be so disappointed because I'm allergic to wheat and gluten. Like I became one of those people sometime 10 years ago. And I'm one of the pioneers that like is actually allergic and not like, no, I just don't want my waist to grow anymore. But a slice of New York Bronx pizza, I'm going to shout out Napoli's Pizza in the Bronx. Like, yo, it was the best. You obviously, the right way to eat pizza is you bend it. My signature move, I used to rip the crust off before you got to put, your garlic, your oregano, a little bit of hot pepper. And then while the oil is all marinating in that, you take the crust off, because the crust is like, well, what do you do with the crust? Some people don't eat it. And I dip it in the oil and the creation that I've made. And then I eat the crust first. And people are like, what are you doing? And then I fold the pizza. Because the best part of that pizza is actually like that last like thick part prior, like right before it hits the crust. So I was like a master pizza eater. I used to eat pizza every single day after practice. I would walk it would either take the bus, but I usually walk because I wanted a slice of pizza. I'd walk like a mile home from my high school. And then I would pass Napoli's, eat the pizza, keep walking home. And then my dad, I'd get home and my boss was like, yo, you hungry? And I'm like, yeah, I just had a slice of pizza though. And he goes, that's not dinner. And then he'd make me rice, beans, chicken, and whatever else. So I was like eating maybe 5,000 calories in a very small amount of time in high school. So shout out to pizza. Pizza's
isn't that such a Latino thing to do that you tell your parents what you ate? Es una comida. Yeah. You sit down and eat because that's not food. And it's it is food in my stomach, but
right. Okay. You didn't eat anything.
You can't. Yes, exactly. But now, World Series or Super Bowl?
So I've been to the Super Bowl, which is kind of crazy to say, but growing up, like my heart, my soul, my childhood, my everything was the 1996 Yankees World Series when they won. And quick, crazy story to that. I was in Queens that day. You know how like your aunts and uncles, they always are like, oh, bring the kids over. And it was that day that the Yankees could win the World Series. I think they won in like 6 instead of 7 or 5 instead of 7. And I was like, I can't go to Nancy's house. Like the World Series is happening right now. I can't go. And my dad's like, we already told her. We're driving you to Queens. I'm like, I'm going to be in Queens for the Bronx winning the World Series? Are you kidding me? And I'm like a 10-year-old kid. Like I don't even know like what significance means. Remember, I get there, I'm crying. Like I'm on the steps of her building. And I'm like, and she's like, what happened? And I'm like, the Yankees are playing in the World Series. And she's like, oh my God, I'm making pasta. Just put the TV on. We're watching the Yankees together. And I was like, oh, say word. Like this whole llorando happened for no reason. And it was great. And I celebrated the 1996 World Series in Queens. So World Series just because it touches the heart.
I love that story. I get it. You had the opportunity to be in the Bronx when the Yankees bring it home. I feel it.
I know.
Now, I've seen videos of you doing this on the red carpet, but I'm going to ask salsa or bachata?
Always salsa, always salsa. I mean, bachata is great, but like if I'm going to, my boyfriend's Dominican, so I'm going to insult him anyway. But like, legit, salsa one has way more steps, and but bachata's way more, it's just boop, 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 boop. Salsa, I mean, when you're thinking about like those classic songs that came out, like Hector Lavoe, and I think Mark Anthony has the greatest voice on the face of the universe. Like, he's been acknowledged by Pavarotti. So, like, let's be real. Like, Mark Anthony has the voice of God. And I just think, even when you go out there and you're dancing salsa, like, there is just this pure, it's a story, right? Like, some of the classic Hector Lavoe songs, it's a story of like, and it builds, and then, when it hits, you're like, oh, everyone's on the dance floor, whether you're really dancing salsa or not. And then it comes back down. And I just think there's something so beautiful about salsa. And actually, my Dominican boyfriend does listen to salsa all the time. So I just think like salsa just gets you. Like, anytime you're in a bad mood or anytime you need to feel something, you put on salsa and you're going to feel a different way than when you originally started that song. So salsa.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm Dominican and I love me some salsa. I love to dance bachata, but dancing salsa, and I always said, a man who can dance salsa will dance his way into any woman's heart. And you know that, especially any Latina, because if you could dance salsa, like, we fall in love. We see the steps and we're like, oh my God, he could dance salsa.
Because you know a story, right? Like, like, there's something more there. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, and not to compare, like, but like a fast food, like, man, McDonald's, this is so good, and you're gonna eat that. But when someone makes you a burger on the grill, like, there's just something a little more there. They're both good. Like, you're both gonna house that thing down and without even thinking about it. But there's just this little bit of like extra corazon, there's a little bit extra there. You're like, ooh, salsa, let's go.
Who has more fun, blondes or brunettes?
I know, because I've changed my hair so many times. Look, like, I like natural. I really do. And I'm going, like, my hair right now, if you can see, it's like gray, white, because my roots are coming in, because my mother, this beautiful woman, Sylvia Morales, she has white hair at the age of like 16, and I look just like her. So the genetics are coming in strong. And so now my hairdresser, shout out to Brenda, who's Mexican from LA, she was like, let's just like see what happens here, because I'm like, I'm tired of bleaching my hair all the time. I want natural, long, like crazy hair that like I don't need extensions for. And so I loved blonde. It was so fun. Like, it really was fun. But I'm like, yo, y'all looking at me, and this is not me, because I'm a brunette at heart. Like, I'm born, raised, like, my eyebrows are dark. So I just think, like, right now in my life, I'm like, all natural, all things, like, let's go. I'm gonna have fun just being me. However, like, blonde, that was fun. Like, I could do everything. It was like I would wake up with like a fro, probably because it was too dry from all the bleach in my hair, but so fun. I mean, I don't know how to answer that one.
You looked beautiful doing both. Would you rather travel back in time so you could have a conversation with your ancestors, or would you rather travel to the future and meet your great-great-great-grandchildren?
So this is wild. I'm going to use this question for other people I interview. That's an amazing question. And I've thought really, like, I mean, you think about this, right? The problem is, it would be really cool to meet my great-great-grandchildren, but if they're knuckleheads, I'm going to be so upset. I'm going to be so disappointed. I'm going to be like, this is what my life is. Like, you didn't even remember me in this. And like, because for us, we remember our ancestors. And my grandma and grandpa in my Colombian side have this crazy story. My abuelo Hugo, who's the one grandparent I still have alive, he's in Colombia, and I visit him often. Actually, he's this painting behind me is painted of a picture of me kissing him, and he's like, "What are you kissing me for?" He's like my favorite human being, and shout out to Hugo. But Hugo moved from Colombia to the U.S. He's one of 11 children, which holy crap! And there was only one daughter in that whole group, Ruth, and he is of a family that all had these geniuses. One was an engineer. My grandfather worked on the MTA, like worked on the trains in New York City. He's a computer genius. He moved from Colombia to New York because he wanted to work at Sears. He wanted to fix computers at Sears. This was like 1940s, 1950s. So you're like, what in the world? Like the computers just started like as the thought, like, and he was like, I want to do that. So he moved to New York. He met my grandmother, Ligia, and she was in Colombia, and they ended up getting married through proxy because my grandmother could not fly and move to New York with my grandfather unless they were married, because back in the day, rules were crap, and that was the way that it went. And so they had a secret wedding. Hugo was already in New York, and she ended up marrying her brother. And her other brother was a priest of that wedding. And they got married, and it was like during a holiday, and everyone was like, what is wrong with this family getting married? And she's marrying her brother. But through proxy, you would have someone step in for someone else. That's the whole point of like proxy, which I learned very young, like, oh, this is so weird. And so that is just the foundation to like even my grandparents. I can't even imagine the crazy people that like birthed Hugo and my grandmother Alicia, and even my Puerto Rican side. Like my dad moved to New York City after a hurricane blew down their house. And so on my one arm was my titi Glady, and the other arm was my Uncle Lou. And she hung my dad to a tree in the middle of a hurricane and came back for him. And he was still there. And he was like flying on a tree. She found the sturdiest tree and hung her oldest son there while she saved the other two. And then that's how they ended up moving to New York City. So I just think the story is crazy. So I would way rather go back than be disappointed in the future. I'm sure they will be wonderful people, but I don't even want to go there because the stories of way back when, I would just like, yo, y'all crazy. Because I think I'm crazy, but those rules, they set the standard.
Now I want you to go back in time because I want to know that story about hanging your child to the tree during a hurricane. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And yeah, that's just pretty awesome. So I think I actually would go back in time. It just reminds me of the movie Coco too. So like, remember me? It's like I'm singing "Remember Me" in my head, like from Coco.
Shout out to Coco, always. Oh.
Shout out to Coco. Now, shout out to the Bronx. So this is our final rapid fire question. Who is your pick? Jenny from the Block or Cardi from the Pole? And that is a lyric from a song before anybody gets offended.
Okay, it's funny. J-Lo obviously was like that first real big, like, you know, like entertainment, like really popped. But for some reason, and even my mom will say this, I love Cardi B. And here's why. One, I think she's way too blunt for any of us to even like, we're all like, oh gosh, this is not, you know, it's not inappropriate, you know, but she actually represents more of, and I think J-Lo did too, but I think she like leaned into this Latina aspect that maybe, let's be real, like white people wanted, because they were like, nah, Latina, then you should speak Spanish and you should do this and you should dance like this. And she does those things and she represents that. I think Cardi B, like for me growing up in the Bronx specifically, like I always leaned hip hop. I always leaned like I grew up with a lot of Jamaicans and Dominicans and Puerto Ricans, and it was like a mix of things. And I think, you know, reggaeton, like I think that was always something that spoke to me more. And so just Cardi's ability to be Spanglish and her ability that she's like, yo, I'm gonna be a hip hop artist. I'll sing in Spanish if I want. She's very blunt about, yo, I got my teeth fixed. I got my boobs done. I did all this stuff. Like, I think there is just this, because let's be real, there's some other famous people in Hollywood and they get all their things done and they're like, oh, this was natural. I'm not wearing makeup. And I'm like, yeah, 8 hours in plastic surgery yesterday, bro. So like, what filter are you using? And I think it just creates this bad habit, like of then we have to, yo, my hips aren't thick enough. I'm not Latina enough or whatever. Like, I don't know what J-Lo's drinking in that magical bedazzled like vessel that she carries around all the time. I'd love to know. Is she sipping in Botox? Like, is that the new way? And we just haven't figured it out yet. Either way, like obviously J-Lo is like, you know, the first, and like that's got to be the hardest thing in the world to pave the way. But right now, Cardi, oh my gosh, like it's just a breath of fresh air. She grew up in the Bronx, like she's Dominican. She speaks like she's Caribbean, you know, she identifies as an Afro-Latina, which is really what majority of Latinos even think about. And when we get pushed into one, like I look like a blanquita half the time. And so, people are like, oh, you're not Latina enough. You don't speak Spanish fluently. And I'm like, you don't speak Spanish either. So what you telling me for? Like, this is how we talk. Like, I speak Spanglish with Hugo. So, and he's fine with it. So that's how we do. It doesn't mean you're any less or more Latino. And so I think Cardi really like put that in there, like like she stamped it. So J-Lo was like the one who started writing things, and Cardi B kind of dotted all the I's and crossed the T's off. So it was a combination much needed, but Cardi, I think I know all of her lyrics. So, just catch it.
Listen, I agree. I love the J-Lo Cardi combination. That Yo Quiero Dinero song is one of my favorites. I mean, that is a song that I play when I want to get like pumped up. If I'm driving, that is like one of my favorite songs. And you're right about Latinos and the Latino culture. I feel like being a Latino is so much more about our culture and how we identify with it, right? Like being from the East Coast, the Bronx, New York, New Jersey, like this tri-state area, we all have that very similar upbringing in our Latinidad, right? And as opposed to the West Coast, where there's much more of like that Mexican culture, the South American culture. Like it's very different, but we're all part of the same culture of Latinos, and it's just amazing the world that we live in. I also have a feeling that this interview is going to have a strong New York accent because we're all from the East Coast, and it's going to come out. So sorry if it bothers anybody's ears when these accents start coming out. And speaking of, the background, your background, you have a background and a very successful career as a social media manager. You did social media for Nat Geo and raised their following to 6 million in 1 year. How did you do that?
I bless my boss at National Geographic, this guy Hayes Tauber. He worked with me when I worked at True TV. And so when I took the job at National Geographic, again, I came in and I was like, I want to be a sports reporter. And he was just like, well, you could be a social media manager with the same skill sets that it takes to be a sports reporter. You know how to write, you know how to like check sources like National Geographic. Like you're not putting out a wrong fact on National Geographic. You get fired. Like there's some strict like guidelines there because it's them and then it's nothing. Like that's where you go for like your main encyclopedia. And so, he's like, you know how to check facts, you know how to, write. And he goes, what's unique about you is you're super creative. And I think we need to figure out how to make National Geographic young again. And we need to figure out how to like bring in like right at the time, National Geographic was looked at as sort of like, the old stodgy, like I'm walking into a library, I might smoke a cigar and I'm going to read 1,000 books in one day. I'm going to go home to my dog who's sitting on the leather couch. And I'm going to, be at peace listening to NPR. And there's nothing wrong with those people. But there's a ton of people who love National Geographic because animals are dope and the history is amazing and the photos. And you're like, yo, I want to go there on that safari. And their ages, 2 to 28 instead of 85. And so he brought me in of just like, I want you to like figure out where our next audience is and have some fun. I want you to take some chances. So I was like, okay. So a few things of note. One, he let me be like still a sports reporter in the mind of a Nat Geo content creator. So I was still watching football on Sundays. And I remember the Chicago Bears were playing on Sunday. And I was like, well, funny. They're not playing very well. And I put on Nat Geo Wild and there were Bears on Nat Geo Wild. And I was like, well, I'm going to have to tweet this because this is just brewing inside of me like a good cup of, Bustelo coffee. And I was just like, the at Chicago Bears aren't playing well right now, but we've got real Bears playing on at Nat Geo Wild. Hashtag enjoy the game. And boom. And I put it out to the world and it just started to change. Like people were like, yo, sports fans are now cross-connecting with Nat Geo Wild. Like, yo, Nat Geo Wild is crapping on the Bears right now. Like, and in that conversation, which is weird, Twitter is just like the most fun playground for people like me and all of you, right? And so I started doing that. I also just was curious of like, what is the different angle that we should be playing? So we just flipped an animal around. Animal butts, they're genius things. Like, who looks at an animal butt? We're always looking at the front side of an animal. We're always looking at their paws and their whiskers and their eyes. But the backside of an animal really should be appreciated more. Like there's stuff going on back there. I think peacocks outside of that, skunks, like there's some powerful things that happen on the backside of animals. And I started thinking about it. So I was like, why don't we just put animal butts every Tuesday? Tush Tuesday. So I started putting animal butts on the Facebook page of Natural Wild. And that also took off, and there was no paid behind it. I mean, it was these, not just the Tush Tuesdays and, me, giving shout outs to football teams playing poorly. But I think it was that sort of mindset. I was allowed to take chances. I was allowed to kind of have some fun and think differently. And it was that really helped, I think, grow the platform, because it started to attract different audiences. So yeah, I mean, an animal butt. Like, you're never going to look at an animal the same way. You're going to be like, turn around. Let me see that butt of yours.
I love that. I love that. Mass appeal. That is the secret sauce, is mass appeal. Everybody has one and everybody likes to look at them.
Exactly.
Just saying. All right. There is a little girl in Hunts Point right now. That's in the Bronx, for those of you that don't know. There's a little girl in Hunts Point who wants to do what you do, who sees you doing interviews and interviewing the players on the Rams, who's seen what you've done. What are some words of advice that you would have for the next generation coming up as you proceed in this path, being your most authentic self?
Like, the little girl from the Bronx on Gun Hill in Decatur is very similar to the girl at Hunts Point, except that we took different trains. And I'm sorry, because the Hunts Point was like the not so great trains that stopped like never. It was like either the 2 and the 5 or like the 6 train, and you're screwed. But either way, I would say that, like, if you want to be a sports reporter, like, go all in. Don't look at the fact that it is probably not as likely. The probability is low. But if you are so determined that your pride takes over your common sense, then that probably means you are supposed to be whatever you wanted. Like, that means you really want it, because it made no logical sense for me to make it to where I am. I remember, and my mom was always like, we didn't live in a 1-bedroom apartment. And it's like, yeah, you have a selective memory, because it may not have been the best times of your life. But I grew up, I forget our address. It was Grand Concourse and 190th in the Grand Concourse. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. It was 4 of us. My mom and dad had a pull-out couch in the living room, and me and my sister slept in the bedroom on bunk beds. And it was like the happiest times of my life. And I watched baseball, Yankee baseball, on Saturdays and Sundays with my dad. I'd sit on that couch that they put up and put back down every day. And I was living a blissful childhood. Like, I needed no more. It was fantastic, and I was happy. And I say that because to think like, oh, I'm going to cover Yankee baseball, that seems like such an easy thing. You're not even realizing, there's parents and there's people who pay a lot of money, and the lawyers and the, kids who come from investment banks and whatever, that they're all going to have an advantage over you because they have more financial support to, send you to X school, Y school, have training, educate you in a different way. Like, I had dyslexia growing up. I still have it. And no one told me. I never got tested for it. My mom's a Bronx high school teacher, and she's like, you just have a different learning curve, whatever, figure it out. And I did, because I was put in these awkward situations. And I think the key for that girl in Hunts Point in the Bronx, get used to being uncomfortable. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you will be so uncomfortable through this journey of going and being a sports reporter. But it is completely possible, because the day that I took the National Geographic job to be the social media manager for them was the day I was like, well, that's it. I'm never going to be a sports reporter again. There's no way you go from National Geographic to ESPN. It's just not supposed to happen. And the next thing that came up was an email from ESPN we love what you do and we want to hire you in some capacity. We don't really have an idea. We're going to create a job for you. So if you just hone in on the things that you are really good at, for me, I got energy for no ends. It's like I could run a marathon every day. And for some reason it comes out when I'm in my groove and stuff like that. Sports, I love sports. I never really had to turn away from sports at National Geographic, which is a shout out to my boss and the people that I worked with. Like if you really like lean in on like, I am very good at this and I'm going to lean forward my creativity, those were actually the reasons that Sports Center came knocking to a person who worked at National Geographic. I was creative. I was like really good on camera, and they saw that in a couple videos I did for National Geographic. And I was still able to like reinvent how to utilize media. And at that time it was social media, and they were like, we could use you. And I went from that to ESPN. And then from ESPN, I spoke up for myself, and I was like, I feel like I'm not being utilized well. And sure enough, they put me on the morning Sports Center, where I was like completely challenged, and way too challenged perhaps. And I learned quickly on the job. I'd never read, live national television on a teleprompter before. Like that's when I found out I was dyslexic, because I was like, I'm getting lost in these moving words. And I started writing things in caps. I started making spaces on teleprompter. To this day, like I never told my producers that I was dyslexic. I told the researcher that I worked with, Jason Starrett. I was like, look, I'm dyslexic. I just found out I'm dyslexic. So any stats that I change, I'm going to come over to you and make sure that it is still right. Because, like in stats, you change one word and it changes the whole thing around, and it becomes like not factual. And so back to my Nat Geo days, I was like, is this correct? Because this reads better for me as someone who's trying to read words like M's and N's, J's and P's, like those things all look the same to me. And I've trained my eye to read better, but it's all like memory now. Like I used to memorize everything I used to do on Sports Center for the most part. Like before I went on camera, I was like memorizing just at least enough. And so, yeah, I would say like hone in on the things you're good at, because no matter that I couldn't necessarily read teleprompter, and now I can, but back in the day when I was like working on it so much, like, if you got that, like go for it, girlfriend. Ain't no one stopping you, because my parents tried to stop me and I was like, nah, I'm good. I have too much pride. I need to show all these white people in my Newhouse classes that I can make it, because I have too much pride now. I just showed my face in too many classes, and I'm like, I paid too much money for this. So if I wasn't supposed to be in sports, like I've definitely gone down the wrong road my entire life.
Listen, one of the questions that we were gonna ask you was, what makes you different? What separates you? But after this interview, it's you. It's who you are. It's your personality, your energy, like you said, and being authentically you, not apologizing for it, being loud Latina from the Bronx, opinionated, and not losing the culture. So, I mean, honestly, thank you for being you and who you are. And you are definitely an inspiration to many young girls from the Bronx and from all across this country. One final question. There's a picture of you on Insta which says, check your privilege. How can sports media check its privilege to create more inclusive spaces for Latinas?
I just brought this up in a meeting today. I think, the sports world is obviously becoming a little more colorful, both in accepting people of color, the LGBTQ community, women and such. And there's definitely all right, you guys are onto something. We're normalizing women in the booth calling games. Like it's becoming a little more normal. And there's always going to be that one person that's got to take that step and go, okay, like let's give her a shot and not be so critical, because mistakes are made. And let's be real. Like if I snub someone's name on air, they're like, take her off. She doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. So I'm not allowed the same mistakes as, Joe Smith, who was working next to me, even though we had the same amount of experience and right? So like that is something, checking your privilege for all those that have the privilege, who are not of color, who are not of a woman, and who are not in the LGBTQ community, to maybe just be aware that, for example, asking athletes questions that you would assume are general knowledge. Why should everyone know who, this is a common question, but Mount Rushmore, why? Not all people know what Mount Rushmore is. Not all people know, the Declaration of Independence. Not all people know, information about our founding fathers. Why? Because now we know that history books are not for everyone. And we also didn't know about the Tuskegee, when they burned down the Black community. Let me make sure I get this right. But when they burned down Black Wall Street, and that was erased from history completely, even though that was a thriving Black community that was self-contained and wasn't bothering anyone, and that was completely dismissed from our history books. And so when we ask questions now that maybe complete common sense, like, you know, like trivia, like 80s trivia or whatever, and you ask like, what's Friends, or, you know, name me like the Bare Naked Ladies, and things that are just like things that they may not have been aware of. They weren't listening to that stuff. Like, be aware that might make people also feel like an outsider. And like, I've actually worked extremely hard. This is one of my good friends who went to Syracuse with me, worked at Coca-Cola for a while, worked at like these big corporate companies. And I was always like, yo, you need to listen to the Rolling Stones. You need to listen to like Beach Boys. You need to listen to all these like songs to like make yourself aware, so that they know, like, yo, you think I'm some like Dominican from the Bronx, but I'm actually like, I know your game and I know my game. And it's called assimilation, to be fair, but I also think then flip it and reverse it. Like, check your privilege. Like, people who are on that side and don't know that, you know, I'm listening to Hector Lavoe all day, and maybe I don't know the Backstreet Boys or the Bare Naked Ladies or whoever else, like, that I might not have grown up with that information, but I'm educated. I'm not like I always say, I've been institutional educated. Like, I went to Syracuse University, but that doesn't mean that like someone I know didn't go to college doesn't have the same IQ as I do, and things like that. And so definitely, like, check your privilege really means when you are looking at candidates and you are looking at people to invite into your team, your whatever, think about those things, because that's the ethical part that is just as important as telling the stats and, you know, talking about games. Like, if you're going to be a storyteller, one, you can't lose the trust of the people that you're interviewing, and you will lose the trust of the people that you're interviewing by not checking your privilege and not checking the fact that, like, how am I going to ask these people questions? It doesn't necessarily have to be things that we all assume are common knowledge.
Absolutely. Sarina, thank you so much for being here and for sharing. First of all, for dropping some New York pizza knowledge on everybody. If you didn't know about the New York slice, now you know. And thank you so much for sharing your journey, your accomplishments. We look forward to everything that you have going on with the LA Rams. Real quick, where can people find you? Where can they follow up and check you out?
You can find me on Twitter at Sarina, Sarina. I was one of the first people on Twitter. I didn't buy it. It's just mine. I got it first. And on Instagram at Morales. My mom is a Colombian Morales. My dad is a Puerto Rican Morales. No relation. My name, Sarina Morales is just how it is. So if you put it all together, it's my name.
It makes it easy. It's simple. You can remember it. That's it.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for watching this episode of Locker Room Talk. I'm Julia Alexandria with Jennifer Mercedes. We'll see you next time.
Going out and pimping out the 7 Black players that you have, or the most popular brown players that you have, and thinking that that's going to change the trajectory of the situation is wrong.